Here's what we're talking about today. A peace plan for Ukraine. What new details have emerged after a series of scandals in Ukraine and the US? Russian tankers are burning right now. A new special operation by Ukrainian intelligence services. Europe is preparing to strike Russia and already has a plan in case of war. Losses in the Russian army are staggering. More than 150,000 Russians have been eliminated in Ukraine. Does Putin want more? All this and more right now. Hello, I'm Karina Kleishin, and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, leave a like, and let's get to the news. Fighting continues on the front despite peace talks. But as we all already know, the Russians are not only fighting against the military, they are also trying to destroy all the civilians living in frontline cities, ordinary civilian people. For example, in Kostiantynivka, Donetsk region, a Russian Molniya drone flew into a residential area of the city, and it was already aiming to destroy the local residents. But the Ukrainian military managed to intercept and destroy the Russian drone right in the air. Here's how it happened. The Ukrainian soldiers reacted quickly, not even giving the Russian drone a chance to aim. Bravo! The Russians continue to advance along the entire front line. If Putin weren't lying about wanting peace, in reality, we see the opposite. We'll tell you what's happening on the front right now.
The armed forces have regained control of the situation in Huliapol. In the area of the settlement, more than 20 attempts to storm our positions were repelled, and there was no new breakthrough according to the defense forces of southern Ukraine.
Today, a new defensive line has been established in Huliapol. Accordingly, the landscape of this area will be taken into account for the new line of defense. These are not industrial operations, Donbass, unfortunately. But there are rivers, there are forest belts where we can hold the positions we have today. As
it became known, after the Russian advance in this direction, the command decided to redeploy part of the reserves to Huliapol. At the same time, the Russian armed forces have already rushed to announce that their troops have entered the district center directly. However, this information is refuted by our Center for Countering Disinformation. Also, the rumors spread by the Russian propaganda channels about
reports from Vysoke have not been definitively confirmed either. There are currently no additional reinforcement resources available, and the intense fight is still ongoing to effectively stabilize the critical situation in this particular direction.
At the same time, analysts say that Pokrovsk remains the main focus of the enemy's efforts. Attacks are taking place around the clock, both in the city itself and on its outskirts, as the enemy tries to encircle Ukrainian forces.
The enemy controls most of the city of Pokrovsk, including the south and the center. And they are trying to carry out such actions, as well as constantly to encircle it, tightening the ring near Mirnohorod.
However, in their endless assaults in the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians are suffering enormous losses. Our command does not hide this. The main task of the armed forces of Ukraine today is to inflict maximum losses on the enemy's grouping. And the defense forces are coping with this excellently.
The losses are so great that they have to use reserves that, in theory, were not intended to enter Pokrovsk. And even with operational reserves, Russia cannot take Pokrovsk. Right now, on average, more than 200 enemy bodies are being laid per square kilometer. That is both killed and wounded, and that's an enormous number.
At the same time, besides defending, our troops in Pokrovsk sometimes even manage to advance. According to reports from the ground, enemy clearing operations are periodically carried out on the other side of the railway, which currently serves as a kind of dividing line in the city.
the defense forces are indeed managing to carry out counterattacks, which are being conducted in particular in Pokrovska. We're talking about Kupiansk, we're talking about practically all our locations where the Russians are trying to advance.
Speaking of Kupiansk, according to Putin himself, the city is surrounded and under Russian control. In reality, there is no encirclement at all, and there are fewer and fewer Russians in the settlement with each passing day.
The enemy, unfortunately, is still present in Kupiansk, but it is believed that the defense forces will be able to improve their tactical positions. Today, I'm not saying that we will be able to completely drive out the enemy, although the trend we are seeing now in Kupiansk shows that meter by meter, our defense forces are managing to clear our Ukrainian land of the enemy. And
Good news came yesterday from the occupied territories. In particular, details have emerged about the strike on Crimea. The General Staff reported that the Panzer S-1 and Tor-2M air defense systems were attacked on the peninsula. After that, drones managed to destroy a warehouse of Orion and 4-post UAVs, as well as strike a command post and a concentration of enemy personnel.
Local Z channels were in a panic, claiming that all sorts of devices are flying in, even Mavics. And a Mavic has a range of 10 kilometers. Where from and who was launching them? Well, obviously not the Ukrainian military. So then who and from where? In other words, these are the same maritime drones whose involvement once again was confirmed by Z channels, and they were apparently acting as mini aircraft carriers, delivering Mavics, which then fly in and destroy the target.
In this sense, the Mavic is actually the perfect tool. So, if you manage to deliver them to the shore, then that's it. These are practically indestructible tools.
So essentially, the defense forces have used a new tactic where one large drone delivers many small ones to the attack site. And given that everything went successfully, it seems that Russian forces will soon have a lot more problems. Meanwhile, the losses of the Russian army continue to grow. It has already been confirmed that more than 150,000 have been killed, and among the dead, the majority of men are residents of Russia's most remote and poorest regions. Because for them, there is no protection at all. And Putin openly neglects them. More than 150,000, and that's only those known from open sources. However, the real number could be much higher. And Putin is clearly hiding this so as not to cause panic among Russians and to recruit more soldiers who are certain to die in battle. But it is possible to successfully escape from the Russian army and find safety. This is proven by the experience of the hero of our story, named Volodymyr. Here is the story of a Russian man who refused to kill and to be part of the empire of evil.
Volodymyr Bernhard is an ordinary Russian guy from the city of Abinsk in the Krasnodar region. In September 2022, he was mobilized into the Russian army. He is a patriot and a decent citizen. He was loyal to the Kremlin's policies and supported the so-called special military operation. But after finding himself in the hell of war, he radically changed his point of view.
There is no justice. It turns out that our state, in the face of our leaders, does not create this justice. They don't want to achieve it, and they don't want to instill it.
For more than 2 years, Volodymyr served in a medical evacuation company. He saved soldiers, providing them with first aid. 3 months after he began his service, his views became anti-war. In 2023, the man started a blog on Telegram and a YouTube channel called Kazakh's Diary, where he reported directly from the front lines about meat grinder assaults and the attitude of officers toward ordinary soldiers. Because of this, Volodymyr was thrown into a pit, beaten, and even threatened with being zeroed out. But in truth,
Despite facing numerous formidable obstacles and enduring countless setbacks that would have deterred many, they steadfastly refused to surrender their aspirations. With unwavering resolve and an indomitable spirit, they continued to press forward, demonstrating remarkable resilience and an unyielding commitment to their ultimate objective, never once contemplating capitulation. Because of military matters, for unauthorized absence from his unit. Secondly, I didn't have a valid Russian or foreign passport.
Volodymyr was unable to cross the border into Georgia. After 10 months of hardship and a failed attempt to leave Russia, he returned to his private house in Abinsk, where he began to prepare a new plan to escape the country. He considered options for escaping to Finland, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and even thought about living in a hut in Siberia. But after some time, the neighbors reported Volodymyr to the authorities. He was detained.
Just a mere few hundred meters, a short distance really, from his very own house, he approached me. He then proceeded to inquire about the money, asking about its whereabouts not just once, but 2 or even 3 separate times, with a noticeable persistence in his voice. In response, I clearly and precisely explained to him the exact location where every single item, every last bit of it, was carefully and securely kept. However, much to my dismay and utter shock, it was later discovered and confirmed that I was indeed missing a substantial amount, specifically more than 80,000 hryvnias, a truly significant sum of money. Almost all my belongings that I had planned to escape with.
Volodymyr was held in the military commandant's building in a cage with 4 other detainees. They had to sleep on the floor, food was brought to the toilet, and they were taken out under guard. After 3 weeks of hellish conditions, the man was taken for interrogation by FSB officers. They told him that a criminal case was being prepared against him for spreading fake news. This was because he was actually telling the truth about what was happening on the front line. The prospect was 2 criminal cases, a lenient sentence and then being sent back to the front line. Volodymyr once again began to think about an escape plan. At this time, he and several dozen other escapees like him were sent to a military unit in the Krasnodar region where they were kept under guard by the military. During this period, Volodymyr established a reputation as a deserter who had come to his senses. He was issued a new Russian Federation passport.
I woke up at 4 a.m., went to the bathroom and saw that the entire shift of guards was asleep. I walked past them, jumped over the fence, made my way through the bushes, got into the city and called a taxi. And I went to the place where my motorcycles and the things that had been prepared for me in advance were located. Then I set off on a motorcycle toward the border with Belarus.
Volodymyr had to hide from the traffic police several times. He crashed the motorcycle and had to throw away some of his gear. After that, he traveled by hitchhiking, BlaBlaCar and taxi. After 2 weeks on the run, he reached Smolensk, and from there, he walked to the border with Belarus.
I'm walking along a wild boar trail. It's more convenient for me to walk here than over there. Now it is approximately 560 meters to the beautiful mushroom clearing, a truly enchanting place.
He managed to cross the border without encountering any border guards. In Belarus, Volodymyr exchanged money, rented a room and got himself cleaned up. And then he bought a ticket and flew to another country. Now, after everything he's been through, Volodymyr realizes that a new, difficult life in emigration awaits him. And this is something he will never...
I cannot bring myself to forgive the Kremlin for its actions, for the profound and devastating impact it has had on my life. It was this regime that cruelly forced me to part with my beloved loved ones, tearing me away from the warmth and familiarity of my cherished homeland. In the span of almost an entire year since my desertion, a period meticulously counted from last December, when I made the conscious and deliberate choice not to return to the brutal war after my brief leave, I have never once, not for a single moment, wavered in my conviction or doubted the absolute righteousness of my decision to abandon that conflict. Under no circumstances am I ever willing to return to the front. At war, I became a pacifist, and I am not willing to betray my values and principles.
Russia continues to lose its tankers. Off the coast of Turkey, 2 tankers from Russia's Shadow Fleet sailing under the flag of Gambia and under international sanctions caught fire.
Who was it that blew up the ship off the beautiful coast of Kefkin exactly? The Ukrainian side.
According to Russian sailors, they are being attacked by drones. Drone attack meaning we fired at the drone? It is not specified which drones attacked them. However, it became known that this was the work of the Security Service of Ukraine and the Ukrainian Navy. They were the ones who attacked the tankers with Sea Baby drones. The tankers sustained critical damage. The Turkish side, as you might have guessed, did not react to this in any way. Moreover, Turkey is ready to send its army to Ukraine. Another stab in Putin's back. With each passing day, Ankara is moving further away from Moscow and closer to Kyiv. How does this affect the course of the Russian-Ukrainian war?
Recep Erdogan has once again stabbed Putin in the back. The president of Turkey did this right after his latest meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. At that time, both leaders behind closed doors reportedly discussed a number of very important issues. These included a ceasefire in Ukraine and further security guarantees for official Kyiv.
President Erdogan and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky stated that the talks were constructive and positive, although no real details about the negotiations themselves were provided.
This sparked an even greater wave of rumors in political circles. While some reliable sources allegedly claimed that Erdogan tried to persuade Zelensky to accept capitulation and agree to the Kremlin's proposal, Ilchinov, On the contrary, they insisted that the Turkish president was discouraging the Ukrainians from accepting Putin's peace plan and was urging them to ramp up military production.
They also discussed the growing defense cooperation, stating that the results of this collaboration will be seen in the future.
And here is the result. The Turkish Ministry of Defense has officially announced its readiness to deploy troops in Ukraine. Troops! Allegedly, they have been put on high alert, and Ankara is ready to send a contingent as soon as tomorrow.
Wherever there is a need for peace, security, and stability, the Turkish armed forces are the first to come to mind. This is a vivid testament to the capabilities, effectiveness, deterrent potential, and authority of the Turkish Air Force.
It seems Erdogan has made his choice. He deserves credit for that. All these years, he has been extremely skilled at sitting on two chairs at once. He managed to help Ukraine while at the same time buying energy resources and weapons from Moscow and still being a NATO member.
In the first few years of this conflict, Erdogan stated that he was essentially the only person who had good relations with both Moscow and Ukraine, was a NATO member, and also had close ties with Washington.
However, as time goes on, it becomes more complicated, and Erdogan is much less willing to continue his friendship with the bloody Russian dictator. After the latest sanctions imposed on Russia, Ankara is no longer able to buy oil and gas in the previous volumes at reduced prices. And that means Turkey has no need to coddle Putin and Russia anymore.
It is worth noting that over the past few months, Turkey's relations with Moscow seem to have cooled off a bit. Although Erdogan still communicates with Putin, it's not as often as before. There have been fewer personal meetings. And one of the factors contributing to this is that, with the election of President Trump, Turkey has significantly improved its relations with Washington. And especially Erdogan's personal ties with Trump have become very close. And
for the Kremlin, the friendship between Trump and Erdogan threatens to be a disaster. Without the blessing of the Turkish president, Russia could lose a huge portion of its grey imports and dual-use goods, which are actively brought into the Russian Federation, including through Turkey.
And the destruction of economic ties with Russia is happening across all directions. Turkey has been a major partner of the Russian Federation for a long time, not only in the energy sector but also in an enormous amount of economic cooperation. But Turkey will also be destroyed.
As for assistance to Ukraine, it seems that Ankara is giving its companies the green light here. After the loud statement by Turkey's Ministry of Defense about sending its contingent to our country, a number of Turkish companies simultaneously announced the establishment of joint military production. So it is quite possible that very soon, not only Ukrainian missiles, but also Turkish missiles, which until recently were friendly to the Kremlin, will be flying at Russian oil refineries deep in enemy territory. Meanwhile, Europe is discussing a strike against Russia. As Western journalists report, citing European officials and diplomats, there are already ideas on the table that until recently were considered impossible. Joint offensive cyber operations against Russian systems. Moreover, NATO will be conducting exercises near Russia's borders. And we all know how much Putin dislikes that. And Germany is actually preparing a secret plan to get ready for a possible war against Russia. We'll tell you more about this in detail later.
Europe is preparing to respond to Russia's attacks. MEPs propose to defend themselves together, learn from Ukraine, and tighten sanctions against Russia and Belarus, as reported by Deutsche Welle. With
Russia, you have to speak in its own language. Russia only understands the language of force. That's why Russia has an excellent relationship with Turkey, despite the fact that Turkey shot down its plane and didn't actually apologize for it. They apologized for what they did, but at the same time made it clear that they had put Russia in its place.
a day later, I think Politico also wrote that Europe is considering retaliatory actions against Russia.
As of now, I think it's still, unfortunately, too early to talk about any more serious response from Europe. Even though it's obvious that aggression against Europe from the Russian Federation has been going on for a long time, whether it's Russian drones flying in or drones entering Europe that are most likely launched by people connected to the Russian Federation, Europe is still not psychologically ready to take the step that, let's put it this way, military mechanisms of pressure will be used.
According to journalists, the ideas for how to respond to the Kremlin range from counter-cyber operations and faster, more coordinated identification of the source of hybrid attacks to unexpected military actions under NATO leadership. Judging by the Wall Street Journal's description, Germany's plan is more concrete. The country has developed a secret plan to prepare.
Russia, Shishimov, this absolutely doesn't mean that the ongoing war is completely cancelled. In fact, the conflict might simply be postponed for a certain period, but over a significantly longer duration. It will most certainly still happen. After that, in Germany, they said no, it won't be 6 to 10 years. The war could start in almost a year.
In just over 2 years, the Germans created a document that envisions sending up to 800,000 NATO troops, including German and US units, to the east to a hypothetical front line. Sources from the Wall Street Journal claim that the plan details the logistical routes along which the troops are to be deployed.
Thank you for watching. To send their troops to Ukraine. But there are discussions. Emmanuel Macron sometimes talks about it, but somehow this idea doesn't really find support among his European Union partners.
By continuing its aggression, Russia must understand that in Ukraine, it may face not only the armed forces of Ukraine, but also other military forces defending the sovereignty of their countries.
By the way, the searches at the head of the office of the president of Ukraine, Yermak, and his dismissal happened immediately after his statements that Ukraine would not withdraw its troops from Donbas for Putin. Are these facts connected? Is the White House trying to pressure Kiev on the issue of territorial concessions to the Kremlin? We will tell you about this and everything else related to the negotiations between Kiev and Moscow in the following report.
Scandals won't hinder the negotiations. Kyiv is preparing for the next rounds.
Next week, there will be important negotiations not only for our delegation, but also for me personally. And we are preparing solid ground for such negotiations. Ukraine will stand firmly on its feet. It will always stand.
The preparations for further negotiations were marked by yet another extraordinary event. Anti-corruption agencies conducted searches at the home of Andriy Yermak, the head of the Ukrainian negotiation team. Today, NABU and SAP are indeed carrying out procedural actions at my home. There are no obstacles for the investigators. They were given full access to the apartment. My lawyers are present at the scene and are cooperating with law enforcement officers. On my part, there is full cooperation. As a result of the searches, no charges have been brought. However, on Thursday evening, Yermak resigned. Meanwhile, the Kremlin received a modified peace plan from the US and Ukraine, which had been altered during the negotiations in Geneva. The US handed over to Russia the parameters of the plan agreed with Kyiv in Geneva. Discussion of the document is scheduled for next week.
It is already absolutely clear to everyone, especially after listening to these recordings and conversations. Dmitriev, Ushakov, and Vitkov, regarding the so-called US plan, the peace plan, say that it was a Kremlin special operation.
After the previous 28-point US plan leaked to the press, causing a serious stir and a wave of criticism, the White House classified the latest version of the peace plan. And now even European diplomats don't know what's in the document. This is an unprecedented situation from a diplomatic point of view. None of us have this information. At the same time, Viktor Orban, Putin's Trojan horse in Europe, arrived in Moscow for a visit. At the meeting with the Prime Minister of Hungary, Putin tried to revive the idea of negotiations with Trump in Budapest. This
was Donald's proposal. He immediately said that we have good relations
with the beautiful and historic country of Hungary.
Both you and I suggest this option. Of course, we would indeed be very happy
to fully and completely agree with that particular statement.
And in the course of our negotiations, if it comes to using the Budapest platform, I would also be very much delighted indeed, with great satisfaction.
The significant visit of Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister, is precisely and unequivocally about Moscow setting up the next insidious trap. And all this concerning development is happening in parallel with the undeniable fact that they are supposedly considering the US peace plan, which has already been thoroughly revised in Geneva. No, we need to clearly and unequivocally see that they are absolutely not genuinely interested in this extensively revised plan whatsoever.
Moscow's goal is to deceive Trump. Lies, manipulation, distortion of concepts, and simulated activity. Putin and his gang are doing everything possible not to take real steps toward ending the war, but at the same time not to spoil relations.
With Washington. A kind of second Alaska, a strategic and symbolic designation that underscores its perceived importance and unique geopolitical position. Because, as they have consistently and emphatically put it, these 28 crucial points were meticulously crafted and formulated with the overarching spirit and foundational principles of Anchorage firmly in mind. Now, it is anticipated that the Russians will undoubtedly endeavor to fully implement and operationalize this very same spirit of Anchorage in any forthcoming and potential high-level diplomatic meeting or negotiation, aiming to shape the outcomes in their favor.
The best evidence of the aggressors' completely unpeaceful intentions is the shelling, where the occupiers are only increasing the activity and intensity of their assault operations, continuing their offensive in the Donbas and Zaporizhzhia directions.
That's all for today. Thank you for watching. Strength to the Ukrainian defenders, both men and women. Glory to Ukraine. Subscribe, like, comment, and share. And see you next time.